But interestingly enough, Totoro wasn't the only feature film that Ghibli released on that day. It actually came out as a double bill next to Grave of the Fireflies, based on the short story by Akiyuki Nosaka. During the final days of World War II, Seita and Setsuko had to go live with their distant aunt because their father was in the war and their mother died from a fire caused by an explosion. As the aunt keeps on being resentful to the kids, they decided to ditch her and go live independently. So now Seita and Setsuko have to survive their own harsh world while it's crumbling down before their eyes. Now, if there was one thing I didn't mention when I talked about Totoro, it's how the production got started. And yes, I did that on purpose because it connects to this film. When Toshio Suzuki made a pitch to Totoro for Ghibli's backers at Tokuma, they didn't really like the idea and rejected it. Destined to get the movie to be made, Suzuki went on to Plan B. Have it be a double feature with Grave of the Fireflies, which Isao Takahata would be directing. And that still did not work well. That is until Nosaka, the original author, decided to step in and back Takahata's movie. Beforehand, Nosaka would frequently get offers to turn his story into a movie, but he felt that it would be impossible to adapt. But then when he found the offer to turn it into an animated feature, the author was pretty surprised, but then he thought that even if a live-action adaptation wouldn't work, maybe an animated one would. So after Nosaka's approval, both films got accepted from two different publishing houses, with Tokuma on Totoro and Shinchoza on Grave. This resulted the studio to be completely split, where one group had to work with Miyazaki on Totoro and another had to work with Takahata on Grave, and trying to balance both while also working on the promotional campaigns was just pure insanity. Even nowadays, many of the animators of that time don't even remember what film they worked on. But back just on Grave, since the movie takes place in Kobe, Takahata really wanted to find child actors that have the proper Kansai dialect. When he found Ayano Shiraishi, he thought she would be a great fit for Setsuko. Despite everyone around Takahata thinking that she could be too young for the part, he only asked her to say the first thing he heard her say for the audition. Watashi no namae wa Shiraishi Ayano desu. Watashi wa kousai desu. For the colors in the film, color coordinator Michio Yasuda decided to do an experimental challenge to make the outlines brown instead of the usual black for most of the film. He said it was done to give it a softer feel, and it was never done in anime before. But he did mention that it was difficult since brown doesn't contrast as well as black. However, this was the only moment that Takahata and his crew could experiment. They wanted to try some more ideas through trial and error, but couldn't because of the tight schedule. As I said before, when it was released on April 16th, 1988 alongside My Neighbor Totoro, the movie was more of a flop. What's even worse was that even less people saw Grave because some would rather leave happy by just watching Totoro rather than leaving depressed after watching Grave. There are some that even say that this was responsible for the double bill's failure. Interestingly enough, since this was financed by Shinchoza, this was the first Ghibli film where Disney didn't make an English dub, since they had to deal with Tokuma. The English dubs here were done by Central Park Media in 1993 and Seraphim Digital in 2012. On a side note, there are some notable voice actors who did work on the Central Park dub, including Veronica Taylor, who was the first voice of Ash Ketchum in Pokemon, and Dan Green, who was the voice of Yugi in Yu-Gi-Oh! Later on, Sakuma Confectionery Company made 2 limited edition tins for their fruit drops, which played a key part in the film, where one looks exactly how it did in the movie, while another featured a picture of Setsuko. In 2005, NTV made a live-action version of Grave in honor of the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. The major difference between this one and Ghibli's version was that this showed the perspective of the aunt instead of Seita. Another live-action adaptation, but a lesser-known one, was released 3 years later. Like Totoro, despite not being a hit, it did receive major critical acclaim, with critics saying that it's an achingly sad anti-war film. Grave of the Fireflies is one of Studio Ghibli's most profoundly beautiful, yet haunting works. It would also be found in many different top lists, including number 12 in Total Film's 50 Greatest Animated Films, number 6 on Empire's Top 10 Depressing Movies, and in some of Time Out's lists, like number 12 on Terry Gilliam's Greatest Animated Films, number 10 on the 50 Greatest World War II Movies, and number 15 on the Top 100 Best Animated Films. A year later, things went back to normal by releasing just one animated feature, this time being Miyazaki's Kiki's Delivery Service, based on a novel of the same name by Eiko Kadono. It's the story of a witch named Kiki, who is going through the tradition every witch takes when they're 13, where she has to move out and live on her own in order to find her identity. As she settles in a city called Koriko, she decided to live in a bakery with a nice lady named Osono, and uses her broom to good use to open a delivery service. Now Kiki has to try to fit in her new environment, accompanied by her black cat Gigi. The production began in 1987, when Group Fudosha wanted the rights to Eiko Kadono's book in the hopes to turn it into a Studio Ghibli film directed by either Hayao Miyazaki or Isao Takahata. However, there was just one big problem. It's not getting the rights, it's more the fact that the two were busy working on My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies. But even with that, Miyazaki was still nice enough to take the job. Not as a director though, just as a producer. At that point, he assigned Nobuyuki Ishiki as the writer and put Sunao Katabushi on his first directing job. As for animators and a crew, he brought in the people that worked on Totoro during the time that the movie was close to completion. Well, seems like everything's set up and ready to go. Except for the fact that Ishiki's script sucks! Seriously, Miyazaki really didn't like what he got offered, since it looks far from what he would envision it. Because of this, Ishiki left the project, and Miyazaki soon learned the classic lesson, if you want something done right, then just do it yourself. When he finished his version of the script and presented it on July 1988, it was then he felt that he was so invested in the project that he decided to also take on the role as director, while Katabushi got downgraded to assistant director. Well, better luck next time, buddy. For the setting of Koriko, Miyazaki envisioned it as a bit of an alternate universe, where Europe never had any of the world wars during the 50s, and similar to the books, it would be located between the Mediterranean and the Baltic Sea. As for the design, the crew went researching in Sweden and took a lot of inspiration from Visby and Stockholm in order to make the movie city. In fact, some of the street names in Koriko were either partly or fully taken from the actual street names of Stockholm. Now, at this point, I think it's a good time to mention about some of the differences between the book and the film, mostly through how it's told. In the original book, the tone is much more small and has a bit of a pattern, where Kiki meets new people and problems with every delivery, all by ending with her overcoming challenges with her good heart. But in the movie though, Miyazaki had to really level up the challenges for Kiki in order to fully present the themes of growing up and struggling with independence. Also, her hair is much shorter in the film because it's way more easier to animate, especially if she's gonna go flying around like that. When the author, Kadono, noticed these changes, she was pretty mad as, say, Miyazaki with Ishiki's script, and she threatened to even cancel the entire project. So, in order to save the movie, both Miyazaki and Toshio Suzuki went to Kadono's house and brought her to Studio Ghibli to show her what they were doing. After that visit, she decided to let the project continue. If you'd like to know more about what happened during this event, then I recommend to go watch the movie Saving Miss Kiki. When it was released on July 29, 1989, it was a major success, especially with female audiences. Not only did the critics say that Kiki's Delivery Service is a heartwarming, gorgeously rendered tale of a young witch discovering her place in the world, but it was also Ghibli's first great hit at the box office, making 2.17 billion yen, which it also earns the title of the highest grossing film in Japan in 1989. As usual, in the early 90s, Streamline Pictures made an English version that was originally done for Japan Airlines. However, this dub is actually considered pretty rare to find, since nowadays, the only way you can find it is through the Studio Ghibli Laserdisc box set. In 1998, Disney released their English dub with Kirsten Dunst as Kiki and Phil Hardman as Gigi, which was his last voice acting role before he died during that same year. The Disney dub was dedicated to him. You might remember Phil for such voice acting performances as Lionel Hutz and Troy McClure from The Simpsons. Very similar to the case of Castle in the Sky, the Disney dub made some changes to the original film that were approved by both Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki himself, including some of the movie's score, adding additional dialogue, replacing the original songs with new English ones, and changing the personality of Gigi. However, due to this dub being heavily criticized, Disney re-edited their version so that it could stick closer to the original Japanese version. However, very interestingly enough, for the English subtitles in the Japanese track on Disney's DVDs, they're actually subtitles that were taken directly from Streamline's version, since that one was always more faithful to the original movie. After the release of Kiki, it was then when Japan started to notice how Studio Ghibli is an animation powerhouse, capable of releasing masterpiece after masterpiece brought to us by two of the masters of their own domain. In American terms, they were Pixar before Pixar. However, having the reputation of pushing the medium to new levels is much more difficult than you can ever imagine. So much so that even Ghibli had a hard time trying to catch up with itself. Usually, the animators would get paid by the amount of drawings and cells they've made. But for the production of Kiki, the quality was so high that it took twice as long to make it, resulting in the crew to be paid only half as much as they should. Not only that, but the people they hired aren't permanent. Their job was to work on one movie for them and that's it. So now that they realized that their team consists of temporary underpaid animators, both Miyazaki and Toshio Suzuki knew very well that something had to change. Otherwise, it would be the end of Ghibli. The first step was to go hire more people to become permanent workers. Not just a good staff, but also young animators in order to train them in the Ghibli way, which consists of working on the 1993 TV film Ocean Waves. And the second step was for Suzuki to resign his job at Animage in order to fully work at Ghibli as a producer. His first film with that credit was Isao Takahata's Only Yesterday, which was Japan's highest grossing film in 1991. With the revenue made for that film, the studio was back on track, and Miyazaki can go right back to work with confidence on his next feature, Porco Rosso. It's the story of, well, Porco Rosso, a freelance heroic bounty hunter who was cursed to be a pig. And other than having a big snout and pig ears, he seems pretty cool with it. In fact, nobody seems to bat an eye about this big anthropomorphic pig walking among them. It's not really much of a curse, but rather just a coincidence. Anyways, as his plane got crashed by an egotistical American called Curtis, he brings it to repairs to an old friend of his named Piccolo and his genius granddaughter Fio. Now Fio is joining Porco to go on some of his high-flying crazy adventures. The movie was based on a short manga called Hikate Jidai, or The Age of the Flying Boat in English, which was part of Hayao Miyazaki's Daydream Data Notes series for the magazine Model Graphics. It was originally going to be just a 30-minute short exclusively for Japan Airlines, but the project eventually grew into something bigger and Miyazaki decided might as well make it a feature film. Before Porco became a pig, he was an Italian Air Force pilot named Marco Paget, named after an Italian animator who worked with Miyazaki. Now I know before I joked about Porco being a pig and no one seems to think that's weird, but the movie never really specified how and why Porco became a pig. Is it a plot element? A symbol for Porco's development as a character? Not really. During a press release, it was actually revealed that it's to present, believe it or not, a political statement.
Thanks for the offer, but I'd rather be a pig than a fascist.
After witnessing the death of his best friend and seeing the rise of fascism, he decided to give up on humanity, quit the Air Force, and turn himself into a pig. How he did it specifically, your guess is as good as mine.
Magic.
When Porco tells the story of when he saw those dead pilots to Theo, it's actually a different take from one of the stories from the 1946 Roald Dahl book, Over to You, 10 Stories of Flyers and Flying. Specifically, They Shall Not Grow Old. It was revealed that Miyazaki is quite a fan of Dahl's works about pilots and planes, but only if it has those things. He doesn't give two craps about stuff like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Fantastic Mr. Fox. When it was released on July 18th, 1992, the movie proved itself to be another great hit, being the highest-grossing Japanese film of 1992 with 2.8 billion yen at the box office. It also went great with the critics, winning the Prix du Long Métrage at the 1993 Annecy International Animated Film Festival, and is at number 68 in Time Out's Top 100 Best Animated Films. Later on, an English dub was made for Japan Airlines and was brought to the Studio Ghibli Laserdisc box set. But then in 2003, Disney released their English dub with Michael Keaton as Porco, Cary Elwes as Curtis, Kimberly Williams Paisley as Theo, Susan Egan as Gina, Brad Garrett as the Mama Ayuto boss, and David Ogden Stiers as Piccolo. Funny enough, Miyazaki actually has a favorite dub, and it's not the Japanese version. It's the French dub. Why? 4 words. Jean Reno as Porco.
Il y a des choses qui ne se disent que dans l'intimité.
In 2011, Miyazaki said that he wanted to make a sequel to the movie called Porco Rosso, The Last Sortie, and it would have been set during the Spanish Civil War. Also, Porco would have been an old man for the film to reflect how Miyazaki is also aging. He would have been writing the film, and Hiromasa Yonebayashi would have been the director. But now the project seems to be scrapped for reasons, I'll get to later. During the time Porco Rosso was finished, the movie wasn't the only thing to be ready to open its doors. At the same time, their new studio in Western Tokyo was open, and it was perfect for Miyazaki from the way it connects more with nature, surrounded by trees and all different plant life. A year later, the project that the new animators have been working on, Ocean Waves, had finally been released on television, and then later came Isao Takahata's Pom Poko, which was their first film to use computer graphics and was the highest-grossing film of 1994 in Japan. The film depicts tanukis from Japanese folklore trying to defend their forests from land developers using their
It's a giant testicle.
So sorry. I was just so focused on talking about Studio Ghibli, I completely forgot that we're still talking about Japan. But anyways, I was about to say something. Hold on a sec. Wait, hold on. Let me just see here. No. Wait, Porco Rosso, new studio, Pompoko. Here we go. Alright, I got this one. Okay. In 1995, Miyazaki decided to take a little break from directing in order to focus only on the writing of Whisper of the Heart. It's the life of a 14-year-old girl named Shizuku, who enters an antique shop that completely fuels her imagination. Afterwards, she makes the risky decision to drop out of school in order to become a full-time writer. While that is happening, she discovers that there's a mysterious boy who would check out the same books as her in the library, which turns out to be a kid that would often annoy her named Seiji. But later she learns that maybe there is more to him than being annoying. Now Shizuku is out and about learning about love, passion, and most of all, herself. The movie was based on a one-volume manga called Mimi o Sumaseba by Aoi Hiragi for the magazine Ribbon in 1989. It would later get a sequel manga called Mimi o Sumaseba, Shiawase Najikan 6 years later that's about Shizuku and Seiji 2 years after its predecessor. When making the film, Ghibli wanted to open their space for who can be amongst their big-name talents. So they decided to give their animation director, Yoshifumi Kondo, his first directing job with this film. They were hoping that Kondo would become the next Miyazaki and Takahata for Ghibli, which he would have been, but he unfortunately passed away in 1988. So not only was this his first, but this was also his only film credited as director. This is marked as the first Studio Ghibli film to be completely worked on computer. Even if they did use traditional means to animate the characters and the scenes, the composition was all done digitally. In fact, this was also noted as the first Japanese film to use Dolby Digital for the audio. For the fantasy scenes when Shizuku was with the Baron, the backgrounds were painted by artist Naoisa Inoue, and he got the job in probably the most unexpected way for him. During one of his exhibitions, he decided to invite Hayao Miyazaki, since he was a big fan of his work. He didn't expect him to come, but it's better to try than not. To his surprise, not only did Miyazaki came, but he also bought one of his paintings, Upward Draft. That was when Miyazaki turned to Inoue and asked him, "Want to work on my next movie?" Interestingly enough, there are plenty of elements in the fantasy scene that can also be found in the painting that Miyazaki bought. Not only that, but Inoue also provided the voice of the tall guy during the scene when they were all playing and singing Country Road.
ナイスボーカル。例の時計が完成した時に合わせたこんな方ですな。
Speaking of which, the song Take Me Home Country Road by John Denver plays a key part in the movie, and would often be brought up and parodied by Shizuku herself called Concrete Road. As for the song itself in the movie, the opening sequence was sung by Olivia Newton-John, while the other times were done by Shizuku's Japanese voice, Yoko Hona. During the making of Kiki's delivery service, there were a lot of concerns with the Japanese delivery company, Kuroneka Takyubin, since their logo is a black cat, and the movie is about a witch making deliveries with, well, a black cat. So to make sure there's no trouble between them, Ghibli decided to have the delivery company as a sponsor for Whisper, which is why you would frequently find some of their trucks in the film. When it was released on July 15th, 1995, the movie did great as the highest grossing Japanese film of the year, making a good revenue with 1.8 billion yen. It even went well with the critics, with Anime News Network saying that it was beautiful and evocative, a fine tale of adolescence yearning and aspiration. The movie can also be found on several different top lists, including number 21 on Film 4's Top 25 Animated Films, and number 54 on Time Out's Top 100 Best Animated Films.